In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Creps, and this is the OSINT Podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 16th episode of the OSINT Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Creps. In today's episode, we're going to be covering two issues of the OSINT Newsletter. The first is going to be issue number 101. You can follow along there at osintnewsletter.com/101. And then in addition to that, we're also going to be looking at OSINT Newsletter issue number 102, osintnewsletter.com/102. There's two different topics we're going to be covering. The first one is going to be a deep dive into the Big Brother. It's a comprehensive OSINT framework tool. This marks the return of a series that we called OSINT Tool Tuesday before. We're still working out the details as far as when this is going to be published. Ideally, I'd like it to be published bi-weekly on a Tuesday, so you get a deep dive into a tool. However, we are still trying to work in the free episodes or issues of the OSINT newsletter. So it may be an alternating type of cadence where in one bi-weekly free issue, you would get a free issue of the OSINT newsletter, which would be a guide on specific methods. And then the following bi-weekly issue would be a tool guide like the one that was published most recently in issue number 101. Still working things out now, but overall, we're heading in the right direction. It seems like the first recap of this has been pretty well received. So we'll be covering that at a high level here in a second. But in addition to that, we'll also be covering a paid issue, which is OSINT methods for archiving and searching videos by keyword. And it's a very challenging OSINT collection method and archiving process where you are trying to take a whole lot of very heavy content like videos and turn it into something that is searchable so that it's much easier to find content at scale. So I'll be discussing that in addition to the typical 3 news articles and 3 tools that I'll be covering in the free portion of the paid newsletter. But there are a few announcements that I want to make before we get started. The first thing that I wanted to announce is, of course, we have CTFs that we are running every single week. You can check those out at ctf.osintnewsletter.com. Participate there, an ethical way for you to practice your OSINT skill set and also see how you are improving over time. You make an account on the CTF page. You can do multiple challenges. You can score accordingly, and then you can see your score go up over time as you try several different challenges. We have things from geolocation to finding specific individuals to looking into specific domains, usernames, etc. So definitely a bunch of different ways for you to practice the tools, tactics, and techniques that we cover both in this newsletter and in the podcast. In addition to that, we have our first promotion of the year. It is an Easter sale for the OSINT newsletter. You can get 50% off of your OSINT newsletter subscription. So typically it's an $80 per year subscription. In this case, it is only $40. So you get an entire year of the OSINT newsletter for probably the cost of, what would that be, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 coffees at Starbucks or something like that. And you can improve your OSINT skill set every single week. We're coming out with new issues every single week. And for that price, it's pretty much impossible to find something of better value in the OSINT space. So go ahead and check that out. You can head on over to osintnewsletter.com and you can find that promotion. Everybody should have received an email as well. The promotion will not last long, so get it while it is still running. We do not run these often, maybe only a couple times per year. So definitely check it out now. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this week's episode. All right, let's jump right in. Issue number 101. Follow along at osintnewsletter.com/101. And we're going to be talking about Big Brother, or The Big Brother, which is a free OSINT framework that you can find on GitHub. Not only is it a script that you can use, but it's also a full user interface that you can also set up so that you can use it more easily within the browser. There's a variety of really cool things that you can check out. And I think that almost recently, just 2 weeks ago, the tool has been completely reskinned and updated. It does have some very challenging branding. It's calling itself a comprehensive monitoring and surveillance platform. I typically don't like when OSINT is associated with surveillance because it usually gives this impression that it is being used to monitor the public against their wishes. However, it always is in the hands of the user as far as what it's actually going to be used for. So as long as you are using OSINT methods and tools for good, it is okay to use anything that's on the market within reason. So I'm going to do a high-level overview of what this tool is, and the free issue number 101, actually does a full deep dive into the tool, including setup, prerequisites, how to get the thing running, how to set it up in Linux, how to set it up in Windows and in Mac, for example. It steps through a bunch of different screenshots, which is actually interesting because the screenshots at this point are older compared to the reskin version, but it does talk about several different use cases that you can use the Big Brother for. But before we do that, I just want to do a high-level overview of what the tool is. So there are a couple different modules that it has built in. The first one is an identity and breach module where you can take a variety of different social endpoints and correlate the two together. You can also look at different leaked credentials that are involved with individuals that you're investigating, as well as AI facial recognition and profile matching. There's also a phone and email mass enumeration tool that's built in. And essentially what that means is it's a multi-tool. There's a variety of different use cases that are built in to the tool to make it easier to be able to pivot across multiple different data points without having to jump into separate tools. In addition to that, though, they have a variety of visualization tools. They have a shadow map, a network mapper, they have a SIGINT sweep, and a sky radar. And essentially what that is, it's just like more geospatial related data. So it's real-time IP and domain threat scoring algorithms, for example. They have async port and vulnerability sweeping if you have a more technical intelligence use case. They also have a deep keyword brand and reputation mapping through their SIGINT sweeper. And in addition to that, they have the sky radar, which is when you start looking into aviation data and telemetry tracking. The last thing that they have is an advanced recon section. There's a dark web watch feature, which is monitoring onion sites for leaks, for example. They also have a crypto analyzer, which is a blockchain ledger correlation. So you're able to dig deeper into cryptocurrency wallets and how those are associated with each other across the blockchain. They also have a certificate vulnerability extraction. Once again, if you're looking into more technical intelligence and specifically SSL, that'd be really helpful for you as well. And last but not least, they have geodata media extraction. So if you're dealing with images, for example, they might be able to pull information out of those. So that's a high-level overview. We include a variety of different screenshots, but the point that I want to drive across is that a lot of these tools are very difficult to figure out how to use. Fortunately, there are LLMs out there now that make it very easy for you to figure this out on your own. But back in the day, before these things came out, you really had to just poke and prod at them consistently to figure out how they were going to work. You'd have to read the debugging statements that would happen in the terminal. You would try to install the dependencies would break, you would get all these errors, and you're like, what the hell am I looking at? I'm never going to get this tool to work. And usually what happens is you're like, you know what, this isn't very user-friendly. I am not going to use this tool. And a lot of times you are leaving a lot on the table because there's really good use cases. And oftentimes what I've realized is a lot of these developers sort of develop with a Linux or Ubuntu type of mindset first. So it works really well on their machines. But as soon as you port it over to Windows or Mac OS, a lot of times the use cases break or a lot of the installation methods sort of break. And that's sort of the issues that I've dealt with in the past is I'm primarily using Mac OS. And a lot of these tools are not designed with Mac OS in mind. So when I go to test out these tools, I run into a lot of issues. But now the great part is you can actually just clone the repository, just git clone, grab the repository offline, and then you can open that up in a tool like VS Code and then run your agent. And if you subscribe to Copilot, which is like $10 a month, you can actually say, hey, look at this repository. I'm running into these errors. Can you just fix the code for me so that I don't run into these errors anymore? And what it'll do is it'll actually go through, fix the code. So let's say you're running on Mac OS and you want to improve the tool so that it actually installs properly. It'll fix the code for you. You'll follow the instructions further, and then it'll go ahead and work properly. Then another part that's really cool about it is if you actually want to contribute to these tools, actually get involved in the OSINT tool development space, you can actually have the LLM update the README file with all the new instructions based on the fixes that they've made. And you can actually do a request to modify that tool and actually contribute to it on GitHub. So there's a variety of different cool ways that you can apply some of this stuff that we're talking about here in the OSINT newsletter. So what we step through is sort of the usage, the profiler tool, which looks at pivoting on usernames, social media accounts, and general online presence. I kind of mentioned that before. You can do this in the terminal. You can just run like a profiler tag and then put in the username, for example. Or if you actually populate the user interface in your browser, there'll be a nice little search bar that allows you to put in the target identifier and initiate a search to be able to find information. Best of all, there's actually a way to export the data in the UI. So if you wanted to actually find all of the results and then export that to like a CSV or a variety of other files, you can do that, which is really helpful because a lot of times it's not very clear how to do that in the terminal. The next thing is the digital footprint identifier thing. So what you can do is if you go ahead and put in an email address, a lot of times there are APIs that exist out there that will tell you like, hey, this email has already been registered on this account. So let's say that you're trying to create like a Spotify account or an Amazon account, you put in your email address and it's like, hey, this email's already been in use. What this tells you as an OSINT investigator is that whoever owns that email has already registered on that account. And there are like tons and tons and tons of these that you can do. And at face value, it doesn't seem very valuable because you're like, hey, okay, they've registered on Amazon. Everyone has an Amazon account. That's cool. But what you can find is as you correlate information together, you're able to actually figure out a full digital presence of where somebody is involved online. And one thing that's really interesting is if you begin to analyze this information, you might actually find sort of information that may be hidden or something that requires analysis to put together. For example, let's say that you find that an email address is not registered on Facebook. It's not registered on some of these older social media platforms, but it's on TikTok, it's on Snapchat, it's on a variety of these newer platforms. That could give you some type of indication that this might be a younger individual who owns this email address, for example. Or if you find that a bunch of websites are registered in a specific region, you might be able to identify the nationality of this individual based on the websites that they're registered on. So these are types of read between the line pieces of evidence that will help you in an investigation where you're not really sure because you're not getting biographical data about an individual. And so the Big Brother does give a couple different modules for this, but there's a variety of different ways you can contribute by checking out additional registration options and being able to submit those as additional modules. So the best way to do that is whenever you go to a site and you begin to register, what I typically do is I have like a bogus email address. I will register on that site, then I'll log out and I'll try to create an account again. And whenever I see that notification pop up that says that this email is already in use, I'll pop up the development tools. I'll be able to see the API that's called that checks that email address against what's already being registered. And then it'll give me a response that typically says that it's already in use. And then you can rip out that API. You can then put that into a tool like Postman, or you can send it to an LLM, for example, and it'll turn that into a module for you to be able to check any email address without having to actually physically be on the website. So I suspect that's what Big Brother is doing here as well. There's a variety of other interesting tools here, but what I really like about this is that it creates everything in a single pane of glass. So whether you're using the profiler tool, the footprint tool, the net scan tool, dark web checker, the crypto tool, whatever it is, you can easily pivot in between all these individual tabs. And so let's say you find very valuable information throughout your investigation. You come back to this tool, you then pivot off the new information that you found, and then you continue to expand out the scope of your investigation. Furthermore, if you have a series of tools like this, it actually gives you a roadmap or a path of what information you're looking for. So you're like, hey, I have a username. If I can get a username into an email, I can pivot from the profiler tool to the footprint tool. And then from there, I can continue to pivot, and because I know that I have all these different tools at my disposal. And then as you begin to expand out the list of identifiers that you have on an individual organization, you can actually connect the dots a lot more easily, especially if you use a visualization tool like Maltico, for example. But that's it for the free episode. I recommend you check it out. There's so much to cover here, and I don't have time in this episode to cover every individual module, but there's something in here that's a little bit for everybody, and it's definitely something worth checking out. And I think that when we posted this online on social media, it was like the number one most engaged tool that we've ever posted for the OSINT newsletter. So people are definitely interested in it. And while we're at it, make sure to check us out on social, because you'll be able to see some of those indicators as well of like which tools that people are really, really interested in. And typically if someone is, or if the whole community is really interested in a tool, it has some sort of value that's, universally recognized by the industry. So check us out on LinkedIn and X or Twitter. That's where we're posting most often, and you'll often be able to see screenshots or videos of these tools in use. This brings us to the paid episode issue of the OSINT newsletter, issue number 102. That's osintnewsletter.com/102. The main topic at the very end of this episode is going to be OSINT methods for archiving and searching video by keyword. We'll cover that in a second. The first thing I want to cover and make sure that we are not skipping over is OSINT news, things that are relevant in the OSINT industry that are worth checking out. The first one on the list is geolocating Taliban in the Afghan desert. This is another shout out to Ben Strick. He's always putting out really quality content. And when we see walkthroughs of specific investigations, these are things that I always want to highlight for the community, because whether you're a beginner investigator, an intermediate, or an advanced level practitioner, these are always great insights, because a lot of times things are very case specific, and you might see a specific method or tool that's being used to get a specific piece of information that you may not have seen elsewhere. For example, I remember seeing in the past, there was an investigation by Bellingcat where they were using a mountaineering software to be able to match a mountain peak to a video or a photo that they were investigating, to be able to determine which mountain range it was, specifically where it was in that mountain range, and be able to geolocate the photo accordingly. Those are things that you would never think about if you didn't have a specific intelligence requirement that made you think outside the box on how to identify some of these specific locations. And so I think it's worth checking out Ben's walkthrough. He talks about it on LinkedIn a little bit, but then he links you over to a YouTube video where he dives in more deeply. He steps you through how he identified a base, how he tracked a flight, how he located a soldier drop-off point, and also how he found dune strike locations. And so if you are investigating conflict, this is definitely something worth checking out. But even if you aren't investigating conflict, there are a variety of different tools, tactics, and techniques that he uses that might be relevant for other investigations as well. So definitely check that out. That is the first thing that I mentioned in the news section of the OSINT newsletter, and probably the highlight of the news section, because it is really, really interesting content. On that note, when it comes to YouTube, I did not realize that Kirby Plessis was putting together such long form content on YouTube about OSINT type of, OSINT topics. This one was titled How OSINT Verifies Viral Claims During Wartime Chaos. So again, we're talking about conflict, we're talking about misinformation here, but it also talks about specific indicators of when you know you're dealing with misinformation. So in this specific case, Kirby and her co-host take a look at analyzing viral Reddit claims, in this case that Iran bombed its own girls' school, by identifying manipulation signals, right? This was a huge claim that was on the internet. There was a girls' school that was bombed. There was allegations that Iran had bombed it itself. There was allegations that it was done by the United States, for example. Being able to know the difference between something that is fabricated, something that is misleading, is the difference between an entire scope of an investigation. If you are starting off on a wrong track, you might deal with specific biases like confirmation bias, where you're only looking for information that validates your original predisposed position. Being able to correct those biases very early on by being able to identify when manipulation is occurring is very key. From there, Kirby talks more about evaluating online actors and naming patterns, comparing search results, and verifying wartime claims using government sources, fact checkers, verification outlets, and a variety of other different tools. And this is something that I really wanted to highlight, is that you should not rely on a single source for fact checking or, for example, determining if something is AI generated, because a lot of times there could be incorrect information that's coming from these tools. You want to build a diverse set of tools and sites and sources that you can use to be able to validate information so you can take a composite of all those different results and come to your own conclusions. So if you find that there's contradicting conclusions about the specific information you're looking for, that's when it's time to dig in a little bit deeper. But if everything is aligning to say this is all AI generated, or this is all false based on all the fact checkers, or all the government sources are saying that this is incorrect, or it's saying it's correct, that's when you know that something is probably legitimate. The minute that you start to see contradictions among those sources is when things require a little bit more investigation. That's when there's an opportunity for you to do your own analysis. And so they talk about this. The YouTube video is about an hour long, so it's definitely a long read. But if you put it on like 1.25 speed, you can dig through it a little bit faster without it being like a speed run of the content. So definitely check that out, and definitely subscribe to that YouTube channel, because they're putting out a lot of really good long form content that we're often missing in the OSINT space, because everything is sort of either a social media post, an article that maybe is a short read, but we don't get a lot of content that is really, really deep diving into topics. So definitely worth checking that one out. It is in the OSINT news section. It is the second item on the list. And again, it's called How OSINT Verifies Viral Claims During Wartime Chaos. The third thing on the list is something that I've always been interested in, but there's not really often a lot of tutorials and guides on how this information can be investigated online. And also, I haven't really found a lot of use cases or examples. So every time I read about these things on Bellingcat and other sources, for example, in this case, it's Bellingcat, it's always fascinating to me, because there's a lot of information, or there's a lot of activity that's happening online that's very nefarious and it's very under the radar. And in this case, it's how wildlife trackers are using coded language to sell protected animals on Facebook, right? This is something that you would think would be picked up by content moderation on Facebook. But once again, just like any sort of environment that there is conflict or any type of malicious activity happening, you create measures to be able to counter some of this bad behavior. And then the threat actors are then learning those countermeasures, and then they're adapting accordingly. And this is the cat and mouse game that we always play in the intelligence space, where you come up with tools, tactics, and techniques to be able to identify activity, and then the threat actors respond accordingly by trying to evade those countermeasures. And in this case, this investigation by Bellingcat steps through how they've identified coded language on Facebook Marketplace that shows the sale of endangered species or other protected animals online. And a lot of times, a lot of tools rely on keyword matching to be able to find content online. And if you don't have the right keywords that you're looking for, or you don't have a very big library of keywords that you're evaluating, sometimes a lot of the stuff would go missing. And so in this case, they do a step-by-step tracking and investigation and show you all the results of how they were able to identify these, and be able to give you a little bit more context on how you can contribute as well, if this is something that you're interested in from a sort of humanitarian or animal rights perspective. So if that's something that's interesting to you, and I always like to see the nonprofit use cases for OSINT collection and analysis, this is a really cool example, especially too, that this is not happening in some very strange part of the internet, like a dark web forum or anything like that. This is happening on Facebook Marketplace. And this is definitely something that would be very valuable as a contribution to Facebook, for example. If you're able to find very valuable information, you can report that to them, and they can not only take that content down, but also be able to remove some of those users off of their site. So nothing really bad there, nothing controversial. We don't really want poachers and other types of bad activity when it comes to endangered species online. So oftentimes, like OSINT toes the line between sort of surveillance and stalking and all types of other types of bad use cases. But no one really balks at protecting endangered species, finding missing persons, countering child exploitation, for example. These are all very clean ways that you can build your OSINT skill set and also contribute to the community at the same time. So definitely check that one out. That is the third one on the list for OSINT News. It's how wildlife trackers are using coded language to sell protected animals on Facebook. And that brings us to the OSINT tools section. We have 3 tools that I'm going to cover in this episode of the podcast. The first one is called OSINT Rack. OSINT Rack is very similar to the tool set that the OSINT Newsletter has launched recently. If you aren't familiar with the OSINT Newsletter's tool set, check it out at tools.osintnewsletter.com. It is a giant library of different tools that you can use for OSINT investigations. But not only is it just a list of tools, it also gives you sort of a high-level overview of what the tool is, whether it's free, whether it's paid. And in the future, now that we are doing OSINT Tool Tuesdays and deep dive breakdowns of some of these tools, we'll actually be linking those to every single one's in the library. So if you find a tool that's interesting there, you can then pivot over to the full deep dive guide that we're going to be providing in the future. So it's going to take us a while to sort of get the backlog rolling, but definitely something worth checking out. But in this case, not to, overplug the tool set from OSINT Newsletter, but OSINT Rack is very similar. The difference between OSINT Rack and the tool set that we provide is that in addition to all the different tools that are available that are found on OSINTRack.com, there's also different reads, so different books, different blog posts, etc. There's also a list of courses, there's a list of events, and you also have the ability to submit a resource similar to what we have with the tool set with the OSINT Newsletter. So once again, diversity is always good when it comes to having tools and resources for OSINT. So definitely bookmark this one. It's OSINTRack.com. Use the search engine, check it out. And definitely support projects like this moving forward, because it's very difficult for you to be able to find valuable and reliable sources for OSINT investigations. And this is just another way that you can track these things. And I'm sure that OSINT Rack has some tools that we don't have. I'm sure that we have some tools that they don't have. And you always want to check both to make sure that you are having the most diverse set of resources at your disposal. The next one on the list is a little bit more on the technical intelligence side, but it is called Tor Node Archive, and it gives you insight into the world of Tor nodes. It has a search engine that allows you to search by IP address and a variety of other identifiers to be able to see if it is associated with a Tor node. The reason why you want to know if it's a Tor node or not is it allows you to know that an IP address is being hid or being accessed through the Tor network. And that allows you to both filter real traffic versus traffic that's being routed through Tor, for example. It also allows you to do a variety of other technical analysis work, like correlating the different Tor nodes together, for example, if you wanted to, analyze patterns in traffic. It also lets you know if, like, you run a site, for example, how much of that information is coming from Tor networks. And oftentimes, from a nefarious standpoint, people may be connecting to your site or might be associated with the Tor network for nefarious reasons, not only just for data privacy. So this gives you sort of a way to correlate the two together. In addition to that, they also have downloadable data sets. So if you just want to pull all the information, plug that into a tool set of your own. I think it's being regularly updated, so it's definitely something worth checking out. You can pull down the data set, you can plug it into your own tooling, and then anytime you run into an IP address, for example, you can check it against the list of Tor nodes, and you'll be able to determine whether or not that's a Tor node or not. There's a lot of services that already have that baked in. However, since a lot of these are coming up and dropping all the time, you always want to, once again, have the greatest redundancy. So if you have this list of IP addresses that are associated with Tor nodes, for example, you can then compare that to other things that are out of the box, like things that come directly out of like a Maltego dataset, for example. I'm looking here, it's searching IP ranges and CIDR ranges, for example, so an entire range of an IP, not just a specific IP. So you can iterate across all of the IPs on a specific range. All right. The URL for this one, let's see. It is Tor Archive, tortagarchive.github.io. OSINT Rack was OSINTRack.com. And the last one on the list is called Crowd Counter. This one's actually really cool. One thing that I like about Henk Van Es is that he always has very interesting tools that he's developing that are very niche use cases, but are very, very creative and interesting. I recently covered the AI Whisperer, which allows you to obfuscate data or sanitize information before you send it into an LLM, and also shrink it from, like, let's say a PDF to a TXT file. You could send that up to LLMs for analysis. It'll then give you the information back. It'll decode the IPs or any type of sensitive information, and then be able to give you an analysis of your report through an AI. That solved a very niche use case of saying, hey, I have sensitive reporting. I want to send that up to an AI. I do not want that information traverse on the internet at all. So I want to sanitize it, but I also don't want to have to lose that in the sanitation. I want to be able to convert that back over to my reporting and my analysis purposes. That's something that he solved, and he solved it in a very creative way. This one is called Crowd Counter, and what it does is it takes a photo, it asks you a few questions about the photo, and then it can analyze and estimate how many people are in that photo if it's a large crowd. So for example, let's say that you are, analyzing a video of a conference. You want to see how many people are in attendance. You can then take a screenshot of the best photo in the video that shows the overall crowd. You can put it in this tool, and then it can tell you roughly how many people were at that event. And what's cool about that is you don't have to, count chickens anymore. You don't have to say like, okay, how many people are in this photo? Let me go ahead and count. Maybe I can do rows and columns. I can multiply. I can give an estimation. This will do this for you. And so this is very interesting, especially when it comes to public events. Let's say like political rallies, for example. Any type of situation where there's a large number of people that are involved. This will save you a lot of time, and it's very easy to use. I wish it had an API so that you could do this at scale. You could just send like dozens of photos at once to be able to get an estimation of all of them. But from a manual perspective, this is really great. It's a web app. You drag and drop the image there. You answer a couple questions, and presto, you get an estimation of the crowd size. So definitely check that one out. It's actually at the Digital Digging website, which is the home of his Substack, but it's digitaldigging.org/crowd-checker. And that's it for the OSINT tools section of the OSINT newsletter issue number 102. Again, make sure to check it out in written format. It's osintnewsletter.com/102. Some of these things don't really translate that well over audio, and likewise, some of the things that are over audio don't translate, or some of the things that are written don't translate well over audio, and vice versa. So some of these things you definitely want to dig into, especially when it comes to these investigative guides. You can do the step-by-step look at them. You can analyze them one at a time. You can jump around. You can look at screenshots. It's really difficult to talk about screenshots on a podcast, for example. So definitely check out the written version of this and make sure that you're following along to get both the static content that's on these sites as well as sort of the analyst take on the podcast. But let's go ahead and jump into the premium content for this episode. It is titled OSINT Methods for Archiving and Searching Video by Keyword. This is something that I've struggled with for a while, and it's really like more and more content is becoming video first, as we've seen with the explosion of TikTok as a social media platform where it's video first. YouTube continues to be steady and growing with tons of information being there. You want to be able to find content online, but you can't really search like an idea without text, right? You want to find keywords, you want to find key phrases, you want to be able to find specific people's names, for example. It's really hard to do that within a video unless you're searching directly within transcripts. And that's sort of what I'm talking about in this episode of the podcast and the newsletter, is how do you turn a video into text, archive that text, be able to search that text, and then be able to come back to the point in the video where that text was mentioned, right? And what we do is we do that through transcription. And transcription used to be very expensive, right? If you had tons of videos that you needed to transcribe, it was going to cost you tons of dollars. In this case, that service has been sort of streamlined so much that it's almost like completely free or very, very inexpensive. And the only time that it's very expensive is if you're doing this at scale, or has any type of cost at all, is if you're doing it at scale. And I talk about both use cases in this episode. I'm not going to be doing a very deep dive into this because it is behind the paywall of the OSINT newsletter. And if you would like to be able to help us sustain this whole publication, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. And again, we have this Easter sale going on, so it's only $40 for a whole year. But I do step through how to do this on YouTube, one video at a time, the different tools that are available to be able to do this for free, so transcribing YouTube videos, and also how to do that directly within the browser through a browser extension so that you're able to see that immediately when you're watching videos. And it's not just the closed captions that, a collection of those, it's the full transcript with all the timestamps that are involved on YouTube, for example. How to get those for any video that you're watching, I talk about that. I also talk about extracting transcripts from TikTok and being able to how to pull those relatively at scale using a free tool or a freemium tool to be able to pull information out. And the reason why this is relevant is we recently had an episode of the OSINT newsletter and the OSINT podcast, and it was, I believe it was issue number, I just want to double check here. I think it was issue number 99, and it was offline OSINT, local search tools and methods. And the great part is once you get this information on your computer locally, there's a variety of tools that you can use to search information at scale. And so in this issue, I talk about pretty much take the video, turn it into a transcript, put it all into a single environment like an Obsidian Vault, and then be able to use all of these local tools to be able to query it at scale to get tons of matches. So if you're looking for a specific key phrase, for example, or a keyword, you can then search that locally and find all the videos that are associated with that keyword or key phrase. And you can use a lot of built-in tooling, for example, like on Obsidian, to be able to get a graph view to see which ones are being mentioned most often. But I talk about that. I talk about pulling the transcripts one at a time. But in addition to that, I talk about archiving at scale. And once again, I'm always going to be a proponent of this. I've said it before, I'll say it again, that if you use LLMs like in VS Code and Copilot, you can do a lot of really magical things with data collection and analysis. And in this case, what you can do is you can go ahead and you can take open source tools. I talk about a tool here that's called YouTube Transcript API. It's a free API that you can find on GitHub, and you can modify this with LLMs to be able to take an input of a variety of different YouTube videos and be able to iterate through them one at a time to pull the transcripts out of all of them in a single swing. So instead of having to use the browser extension or the web app to put one video at a time, copy the transcripts out, paste them into a markdown or into a CSV or something, and do it one at a time, which is going to take you all day, maybe all week, depending on how many videos you have, you can just take all of them in a single shot. You can run them through YouTube Transcript API. You can pull all that information out, get all the transcripts. Like I said, you can throw that in an Obsidian Vault. You can throw that into any type of tooling that you use. And then you can use tools like ripgrep or whatever. You can run regex patterns. You can do all types of things to be able to find all the instances of a keyword. So instead of having to hunt and peck and watch a ton of different videos, you pull the transcripts out, you query at them at scale, you connect the dots, you say, okay, all these different videos are mentioning this person, this idea, this phrase, whatever it may be. And then instead of having to watch 100 videos, maybe you only have to watch 8. Because these are the only 8 that contain the words or the phrases that you're interested in. And in addition to this, because we have a transcription of the content, we can actually go directly to the part of the video that actually mentions the keywords, key phrases, or individuals that you're looking for. So instead of watching 8 whole videos, maybe you're only watching 8 snippets within 8 videos, for example. So I talk about doing this with YouTube, but I also talk about doing this at scale with a variety of other different providers, not just YouTube. You can do this with TikTok. You can do this with X.com. You can do this with Google Drive. You can do this with local files. You can do this with all kinds of things. The only difference here is that you need to be able to provide an API key for your LLM of choice, whether that's Grok, whether that's OpenAI, whether it's DeepSeek, no matter what you're using, Perplexity, Hyperbolic, whatever it may be, you can enter your API key into this tool, which is called Summarize, and it'll be able to pull in a video, use your LLM API key to transcribe it, and do all the same thing that the YouTube Transcript API is doing, except at a very small cost because of the cost of API keys. So once again, this is a very, very inexpensive thing to do. I would think maybe 5 years ago, it would probably cost you an arm and a leg to do this something with AWS or do this with a off-the-shelf transcription tool. LLMs have made this very, very inexpensive, and so you can probably do it for, I'd say probably $10, $15, depending on your budget. But one thing that I do want to call out is as you're digging into some of these sites and pulling content off of them, you're going to be running into CAPTCHAs and other types of anti-scraping technology. In this case, it also may be worthwhile getting a proxy server or a list of proxies that you can use to do scraping with. In this case, this tool uses a web share proxy, which is something that I've seen very popular in the OSINT space. There's a variety of different proxies you can use. You can use Dakota, for example. You can use WebShare. You can use, I think, IP Royal. And the cool part is whatever you choose to use, you can, once again, you can open this project from GitHub into your VS Code, and you can just say, hey, Claude, can you rewrite this? Instead of using WebShare, can you set it up for Dakota? And then presto, it has rewritten the tool specifically for your proxy of choice. So this is another interesting use case on how to customize tools specifically for the tech stack that you're working with. But that's the last thing that I mentioned here. And then once again, you have all this information transcribed, then you can pivot on over to issue number 99. You can learn for free how to do local search using a variety of methods directly on your machine to be able to search for content that you have. This doesn't necessarily just have to be transcription. It can also be a variety of other things like data sets that you've downloaded, leak, databases, CSVs that you pull off the internet, PDFs or text files that are kind of loosely related to the investigation that you're looking at. So you can actually fuse the data together between what you're pulling off of videos as well as everything you've collected over time. And if you have a lot of storage on your computer, let's say you have like a larger storage PC, like terabytes of data available, for example, you can build a giant archive of valuable information. And before you know it, you're now an OSINT service. You can be like, hey, I have a variety of local information on my computer. I've been collecting information at scale for a long period of time. If you have any information that you're looking for, I can actually search locally on my device and I can provide this information to you. And so if you're wanting to get involved, that's also another use case that you can think about. It's like I can actually be the archive and I can provide services to people who are looking for niche information that's hard to find. So this is why it's cool, it's relevant, and I know a lot of people are trying to get involved in different ways. And that's one of the things that comes to mind for me is, and I know that like, for example, Intel Techniques did this for a while. They had like a gigantic repository of custom information that they were scraping themselves. They'd be able to monitor information about specific individuals related to investigations. This is something you can do as well. And it's never been easier to be able to not only get information, but structure it in a way that makes it easier to find. You can take, like, for example, a massive Obsidian vault that's maybe like 3 terabytes large of a variety of different information. You can just have your agent, your LLM, restructure it in a way that makes it easier to find or maybe correlate information together. So definitely something worth checking out. But that's it for this episode of the OSINT podcast. We covered a lot here. We covered the Big Brother tool, which is a OSINT framework that's free. We stepped through the use cases, and the written version of the OSINT Newsletter actually steps you through how to set it up and how to get it running in your own environment. Then we checked out 3 OSINT news topics and 3 tools. My favorite on the list is definitely that investigation into the geolocation of the Taliban in the Afghan desert. I just think Ben just does a really good job at stepping through it. And also, I think it's really cool that Crowd Counter is a free tool that you can use for a very niche use case if you are investigating crowd sizes, for example. So definitely check those out and make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you found this interesting and valuable. I think we are distributed on every major podcast platform now. So feel free to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, just send me an email, Jake@OSINT News or OSINT.news, Jake@OSINT.news. We'll make adjustments. I'm running the podcast. I'm doing most of the content writing. We have a little bit of help when it comes to the free content and the tools section, but overall, we have pretty strong creative direction here at the publication. So anything that you're looking for, we can definitely work it in. And again, make sure to follow on social. We have a lot of visual aids that are involved as well, especially with the tools. So check us out on x.com/OSINT Newsletter, as well as finding us on LinkedIn. But that's it. And I appreciate you all listening. I will see you all again in a couple weeks.